Hello everyone, my name is Tova Sheldon and this is a brief refresher on quality assessments and ways that we can ensure our assessments that we're using and building in our classrooms are of the best quality. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is what's called the assessment spectrum, and this is built out of some research from Richard Stiggins. And the first thing to consider or to revisit from our time together before was this idea that we need to look at our assessments in three ways. The first way that we can look at our assessments is looking at the individual assessment items. And when you're looking at individual assessment items, we're talking about any kind of item that's on an assessment. Maybe it's a multiple choice item, maybe it's a constructed response. It could be a performance task that's still considered an item, so like a presentation, any other kind of performance task that is at hand. And then the last one is oral communication and how we set that up. Each of those are considered item types. And so when we look at those assessment items, we could run those items through something called quality filters. And the quality filters are a set of checkpoints or questions that you want to ask yourself when you're looking at an item. So does this item have a clear target? Is it connected to one specific content expectation? If you scroll down through this document that you can access online, does the item have content match, meaning do the nouns and the GLICs or Huskies or Common Core or whatever expectations you're using that are mandated by the state, do the nouns match to ensure that there's alignment there? And then also, do the verbs match? So are we asking the students to do the right performance to make sure in that task, to make sure that there's alignment? So there are actually 6 non-negotiables, 6 quality filters that every item should match in order for the item itself to be quality. Now those are the non-negotiables. It would be better if we could actually match all 17 quality filters. And so some item types lend themselves more to match all items than others, or all quality filters than others, but it's at least a good starting point. So if you can make sure that your items match at least the non-negotiables, then you know that you're starting to build quality items. So there's 17 quality filters would be the best case scenario, and you can check those out on your own time. But remember, when we're thinking about assessment as a whole, we first have to look at each of our individual items. So running through the quality filters will help you have quality items. Now, just because you have a quality item or an assessment full of quality items doesn't ensure that the actual assessment itself is quality. There's actually other things that also are involved in building a quality assessment. So don't just put all those quality items together, but purposefully we're going to use what's called an assessment blueprint to ensure that the assessment as a whole is quality. So what we're looking at next is individual assessments. And the document that's going to help us do that is called an assessment blueprint. Okay, so these are all things to consider. These are all things to consider when creating quality assessments. So when you're looking at your assessment, now that you have quality items, that means that you've done the item check. After you've done an item check and ensured that your items are quality, you're going to check for organization. Did you purposefully put your items in a certain order? So you need to decide, should I make it from easiest to hardest? Should I do it from lower cognitive demand to higher cognitive demand? Should I group my items based on the content or the expectations that they're assessing? Is my format clear and consistent in those types of things? Formatting is a big piece of an assessment. You never want to trick your students. You want to always give them the best opportunity for success. So having a clear, consistent format with enough white space, with clear directions and things like that, those are all part of making a quality assessment. Another piece to checking on your blueprint is having a really clear administration practice, meaning when you go to give your assessment, you want to be really clear and consistent in those directions. So say you give your assessment to first hour and you give them one set of directions and you realize that those maybe weren't the best set of directions. So you change it up a little bit for second hour. Well, then when you get your data back, you don't really know if it was, if the results were actually true, because you may have given the students better directions the second time around than the first time around. So all of these things play into whether your assessment will really be reliable and valid. So think about what your procedure is for assessing or for administering your assessment. And then the last piece to your blueprint is knowing ahead of time how you plan to grade your assessment and what data you want out of the assessment. So those are two separate things. Although grading can produce some data, that's not really the only data that you want. You don't really only want one singular grade as your data point. There's really multiple data points that can be gathered from every single assessment. So it's really important that ahead of time you've distinguished and decided what you want to do for both data gathering and for grading. And when that's done ahead of time, then you also can decide what piece of those should be communicated to your students and to the parents. If this isn't done ahead of time, then a lot of times we are unclear with our students and our students don't know what to expect. So one of the ways that you can do all this is to physically write it out. And that would be extremely exhausting if we tried to do that for every one of our assessments. Even if we just did it for our summative assessments, it still would be a struggle. But this is one type of blueprint setup that has been used before, and it seems to be effective. It's very short, but it does make us realize the idea that we need to have one expectation per item. We should make sure the level of cognitive demand matches. We know what kind of data we're getting back, and so forth. So these are all important components. These are things that we want to be thinking about as we create our quality assessment. Even though we don't always have the time to write it out, the first step that we want to do is become so automatic in thinking about this that we do it naturally as we're creating our assessments. Down the road, it would be great to have tangible items showing the quality, but this is at least what we should be thinking about. So when you look at the assessment spectrum, we've got our assessment items, so that's wonderful. All of our quality filters have been met. We have quality items. Those items build into quality assessments, so individual assessments that are of quality. Now, the last part is probably the most complex, because the first ones you can see they're kind of tangible, like you know if you've done them or not. The last one is really hard because it's all about how these assessments build a big picture of students' learning and having that system set forth in the beginning. So you know which assessments you're using summatively and which assessments you're using formative or interimly, and you've planned those assessments along the way. So I'm going to show you this next document, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit confusing, but this is the idea of a balanced assessment system. It's when you purposefully embed multiple assessments that give the largest picture of a student's abilities for a certain Common Core or Husky or whichever expectations you're using. So this is somewhat what it looks like. So each X indicates a formative assessment. So obviously as teachers you're assessing all the time. And these formative assessments can be formal or informal. That's fine. Formal would mean they're producing some sort of tangible data. Informal would be observations and other tools that you're using that you may not actually document, but they're occurring. So if we work backwards in a balanced assessment system, we would figure out what we actually want our students to do or perform on the final assessment. On the final summative assessment, where must they be? And then we'd work backwards and say, okay, well this may show final achievement or status in the end, but we also want to measure other things. We want to measure if they've grown, and we also want to measure the other components of their education. Okay, so we'd probably back up and say there was some kind of pre-assessment. This doesn't have to be a pre-test. A lot of times for simplicity and efficiency, we go that direction, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any kind of pre-assessment that you choose, as long as there is alignment to the post-assessment. They don't have to be identical, they don't have to be the same. They just have to be assessing the same information. So that's our pre and our post. And then hopefully somewhere in between, you're getting that interim checkpoint. You're getting that what an interim assessment is a checkpoint along the way that is used both formatively in terms of guiding your instruction so that you can get to the post assessment, but it's also used summatively as this is what they know so far, and you would be able to pull a grade or some final deciding factor out of it. So this is the setup for what a balanced assessment system looks like. You've taken all of your other quality assessments and put them together purposefully to give that big picture of what a student has learned and where they have been and the changes that have happened in between. So that's the brief reminder of what a quality assessment looks like. There are a lot of other people out there who know a lot more than me about assessment. So these are all videos that you can access online if you want to learn more about specifically writing constructed response items, or specifically about using portfolios to assess students and so forth. So each one of these are individual videos that range from like 15 minutes to 30 minutes. And one of them that I really liked was writing the rubrics and scoring guides. That's something that we can all improve on. So the best place to go to get all of these videos is mystreamnet.com. It looks like this. Okay, and you can see all of these videos are here. MyStreamNet is free. It's put on by the state, by REMC, and there are tons and tons of resources here. So if you want to look up something more specific than the general information I've given you, this is a really great place to go. So I hope this little introduction or refresher on assessment was helpful, and if there's anything I can do to clarify questions that you have, please feel free to contact me. Thank you. Bye-bye.